Well, it's been a while since we've done one of these PGN par fours. I'm Matt Gajtka along with Zac Weiss. But, well, even though it's been a while since we convened, we have some rather urgent news to deal with, obviously, with the huge news in men's professional golf. Really kind of crazy to think that it was only a year ago that we had our first LIV event, and it was the first real fracturing of men's pro golf in a long, long time, since maybe the late 60s when the PGA Tour was established. And here we are a year later, at least, with a memorandum of understanding between the two leaders, actually three leaders, if you want to count the DP World Tour, that all these entities are going to unite in some form or fashion. How it happens, when it happens, or even if it gets off the ground, regarding perhaps some interference from American lawmakers, that's all to be determined. But here we are, and not quite an emergency pod, Zac. We gave it about a day to breathe here before we decided to chat about it. And I do promise we will get to Zac's coverage of the Memorial Tournament in Columbus, won by Victor Hovland. I also want to discuss a little bit about Rose Zhang and her spectacular professional debut after winning the NCAA championship individually for the second straight year. But of course, we're going to talk about not necessarily a merger, Zac. I feel like that's the wrong term, even though it's been used quite a bit. It feels like a brand new entity is what's going to be established here once the two sides, the three sides, whatever you want to term it, do get together and get down to signing contracts and figuring out the details. But I just want to gauge, first of all, for you, how surprised you were that we did see a real negotiation and a real agreement between the PGA Tour, represented by Commissioner Jay Monahan, and call it the Saudi Public Investment Fund, which has been funding LIV. So you have those two sides. It appeared to be they were at loggerheads. We were going to go to a protracted legal battle. And instead, we have, I felt like, a miraculous announcement. And I guess we'll figure out the details from there. But on a level 1 to 10, where would you rate your surprise about the truce? Because mine's somewhere between 9 and 10, I think.
Surprised that it happened? No. Surprised that it happened this soon? I mean, how would you not be? I mean,
Yeah.
all of us golf writers were talking all the gossip and talking all of the shop at Memorial, and we're talking about no cuts at elevated events except the legacy events. And now all of a sudden you go into waking up. I'm still recovering from my sleep schedule from Memorial, and lo and behold, I thought like everybody else it was a joke. I mean, none of this had been broached. The players by no means knew. The agents by no means knew. Greg Norman knew about 10 minutes before everybody else did. I mean, Rory McIlroy knew maybe a couple of hours before everybody else did. So really across the board, this is a stunner that it's happened this soon. It feels like a lot's been accomplished, but until we get the framework of this accomplishment and what each side is quote unquote giving up, that's kind of where you're going to really see what's going to happen when all of these straws and this Jenga board are kind of maneuvering around. It's going to be a game of chess three ways. I mean, everybody out of the three parties has something that the other one needs, which is why this was a necessity. And obviously the political ramifications are there. I mean, the PGA Tour is very aggressive in its approach in going after the political ramifications. And if there's a real loser in this process for the second straight year, it's the RBC Canadian Open. And the fact that Jay Monahan went PSA political level with no one's ever had to say they felt bad about being a member of the PGA Tour. Well, thanks, Mean Joe. Appreciate that. But it's been so much in that year. I mean, we were talking about this in the press box, myself and a couple of other colleagues, and Jeff Hathorn and Bob Pompiani. And Pomp and I were kind of in agreement that the biggest winner in this whole thing might be Phil Mickelson. Wouldn't you believe it? I mean, in all of the times that he's been the quote unquote smartest guy in the room, and all of the times that he's taken stands, of course, the Ryder Cup when he wanted to bring the pod system back and took a big old number 2 on Tom Watson and really by proxy Ted Bishop's expense. Really, this was by far from the beginning when he spoke with Alan Shipnuck and called the Saudis crazy MFers, scary MFers rather. And really, it seemed like Greg Norman was he was the commissioner and still is the commissioner of LIV, although his role moving forward in this and his very noticeable absence leads anybody with two thumbs to believe that his shelf life is not long, and maybe that's a concession that Jay Monahan wanted to agree with, where he feels that Norman's divisive. He can't really get rid of Phil, but you can get rid of Greg Norman, and maybe that's the next best thing. Has Phil fractured some relationships in this process? 100%. Is Phil going to be a Ryder Cup captain? No, I would doubt it at this point. I think that there's just going to be a lot of hard feelings and playing for a guy that took that stand. But in the grand scheme of things, he took shots at Brandel Chambly. He took shots at Eamon Lynch. He took shots at everybody he could. And while Patrick Reed folded up a chair from trying to do the same thing, was Phil really wrong? I mean, whether he actually won or he perceived that he won, regardless, he's won. He made the biggest statement out of probably anybody, and I'm sure Phil either knew some details. I mean, even at the press conference today at the RBC Canadian Open, Rory McIlroy said he knew they were talking. Of course, he wasn't privy to the details, but you can break it down: who wins, who loses, do the golf fans win, do the golf fans lose? And it, for me, do golf fans win? It depends on if you look at it strictly politically or not. If you look at it politically, then, well, we technically don't know if LIV is included in this deal. It's only the PIF. So there's still going to be some communications there with how much is involved there. And if it's just a seat on the board and they continue to operate, but do so with a handshake agreement, or if LIV truly will come over. Will LIV get official World Golf Rankings points now that the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour, two obvious detractors? I mean, even Seth Waugh was kind of, for the PGA of America, he was kind of very much in that not so sure camp. So for all of this to delegate, and I think another big winner in this is the four majors. I really think that that's kind of lost in all of this, in that it felt like first grade where you had two bullies, and here all of these majors are just saying, you know what, you guys are adults, just make a decision. And they kind of got stuck in the middle of that tangled web. Now that there's an agreement, I think that it's going to be a lot easier for those tournaments to navigate. But now those sponsors that maybe were dried out of money on the PGA Tour, how do they proceed? We don't know. What will the format be? Will there actually be team play at the PGA Tour level? We don't know. There's just so much. Will European Tour, DP World Tour players that resign their membership, will they, like the members that could be welcomed back in the PGA Tour, would they be welcomed back, and what would the ramifications be there? And will that attract the fans that DP World Tour desperately needs? They need some bigger names and some star power. And even on the PGA events, there's been so much between designated events and majors and just such a compact schedule. The DP World Tour is really, they've been strung along by the PGA Tour too, and you could argue they've been the biggest loser in this whole thing, because notoriety wise, you just don't have those names. And even guys like Ryan Fox, who was experiencing success in the DP World Tour, well, they're members of the PGA Tour now on temporary membership, so they're getting poached left and right, whether it's by LIV or by the PGA Tour. So there's a lot to break down, but I mean, I think the biggest loser in this whole thing, it's 1 and 1A between Jay Monahan and Rory McIlroy. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, in wrestling terms, Jay Monahan sold out. I mean, he had such a strong statement. He said blood money. He mentioned 9/11. He's now thrown everybody that's politically 9/11 families completely under the bus, and their strong statement in response was a strong one. Interview wise, he's not going to win the interview game, even with the Golf Channel, which is a subsidy. The PGA Tour has stake in that. They run the Golf Channel. They're still asking the hard hitting questions. There were no softballs in that 15-minute interview. The fact that players want Jay Monahan gone, I mean, the question's going to be, how does this benefit Jay? And simply put, it's going to be dollar signs. I mean, that's always what it is, whether it's himself, the tour, this proposed CEO position in addition to the commissioner. But how much of that will happen? And if there's some backlash, how much is he going to be parachuted by LIV? Is there a backdoor agreement if he gets run out? I mean, there's much more questions than answers. And that's what makes this so fascinating. And the fact that, yeah, it's a sports story. Yeah, it's a business story. And how that's going to prevail, and our players going to have to force themselves to make a choice. We don't want to accept this money. Maybe we're just going to play elsewhere. Maybe this just isn't for us anymore. I mean, as is, a lot of these players were going to be pushed out by 80-person designated events, and now you're throwing LIV into that. So there was already a tough pathway. And even the future of designated events, is it going to be 80 players now that you might have someone from LIV potentially come over? So does that make that field make it more competitive and numerous in numbers, or does it just make it more competitive with, hey, here's the criterion, we have to make sure the LIV golfers, if they're a part of this agreement, can come over and be judged on a fair scale, and that they also are protected from the drunk fans or the other fans that might not be able to be as accommodating based on the viewpoints that those LIV golfers have had, whether perceived or not. So there's a lot to unpack here. And even with one day, I think there's still a lot of processing at this point. There's a lot of reaction. This is a very reactionary and a very cautious situation, but really it's a lot about nothing, because it's only words at this point. We have seen nothing on paper. We just know what happened. We just know that nobody from the top on down was told. Nobody had any inkling, which it's a credit to them in today's age that this was not leaked. But the fact that it now is public knowledge, there's a lot to digest here. So it'll be interesting to see how all three sides can push forward and find success. And honestly, antitrust, PGA Tour, that certainly probably played an issue in their minds. They probably had some skeletons. I think LIV contending in both of the first two majors, Brooks Koepka obviously winning one of them, was a very, I think, important factor too, where I think you laughed at the model, the loud music, the shorts, the third 3 rounds, the teams. Brooks Koepka has been in both majors on the first page of the leaderboard. Phil Mickelson was right there in the Masters, and he was never in form. Even DeChambeau was in contention at the PGA for a while there. So it's not like the LIV guys are rusty. They know what it takes to turn it on. So I think it also, of course, again, comes down to money. And I mean, the money that the PIF has, excuse me. Apparently, I was at the baseball stadium too much the last 2 days. The PIF just has an endless supply of money, and the sponsors are going to be can only do so much. And I think the writing was on the wall. It was going to be a few years down the line. So at least the exercise is safe, but at what cost? We'll find out.
I think you laid out pretty well that I guess there is a lot to discuss in terms of the what, but there's also a lot that we just don't know. So it's tough to go much deeper into that. We can only speculate as to what a unified schedule might look like. I think it'd be great if somehow this new tour would be able to maintain, say, a stop in Australia, some stops in Europe like Valderrama. We're going to see that in a couple of weeks or in a few weeks' time on the LIV Tour this year. So I would love to find a way to make this that world tour that, well, ironically, Greg Norman was pitching back 35 years ago, that Tim Fincham, then the commissioner of the PGA Tour, semi-appropriated as the World Golf Championships, which just went away, another coincidence, this year. But yeah, the what's to be discussed, what becomes of the team situation. Are PGA players currently now allowed to maybe buy into the whole team franchise framework? I don't know. Or is it all going to be ditched? Is LIV just going to be confined to the trash bin, and we just go on with a rejuvenated with Saudi dollars PGA Tour? I don't know. But as far as the why is concerned, that's where I think it's more interesting, Zach, is even though Monahan said it's about legacy, not leverage last year, it is all about leverage, obviously, when it comes to these kind of negotiations. And I think both sides, if we can just put the DP World Tour aside for right now and their commissioner, Keith Pelley, we'll talk about him a little bit later, perhaps. But as far as LIV is concerned, LIV was showing some cracks in the armor here this year just because, well, I thought it was a mistake, Zach. I know they wanted to get on TV, but I thought YouTube for free was a great access point for LIV, and I thought they could have easily rolled that over here in year 2 as they expanded the schedule. I think it was easy for people to find, easy to check in quickly. I was able to watch some of the events on their LIV Golf Plus platform online, but a lot of folks didn't know about that, I'm sure. And so that contributed to the awful ratings numbers that we saw on the CW and on the app there in the first several events of this season. So I feel like LIV was leaking oil in that regard. They weren't quite getting the TV audience, even though in person events like Tulsa, Adelaide especially, looked really vibrant, but they still weren't getting the television eyeballs, the streaming eyeballs that they wanted to get. And as for the PGA Tour, Zach, it just seems to me that they were really overextending, asking a lot out of sponsors who previously had tournaments that drew okay fields. But if you aren't part of the designated model, which I think might be going away after just a year or a year and a half, who knows? But if you weren't one of those designated events, like the Memorial that you covered this past week, then you were left out in the cold. You were left with a diminished product. And it was all well and good to say, yeah, the designated events are great. It makes for a bigger splash in terms of attention and in terms of obviously strength of field. But what's to become of all these other events that aren't designated? So I think that some sponsors probably were looking at pulling out or decreasing their commitment to the PGA Tour. And the purse size obviously went way up. It doesn't take an accountant to figure out that they were paying out more than they were bringing in, I would imagine. And I don't know how long that could have lasted. So I think both sides had motivation to come to the negotiating table. Apparently, one of the real movers and shakers in world golf, Jimmy Dunn, brought Yasir Al-Rumayyan, the head of the PIF, and Jay Monahan together in a room for the first time. They met several times. And there was a report on Golf Channel, Zach, today. I don't know if you saw that today, meaning Wednesday, June the 7th, that there was a multi-major winner who was close to signing with LIV. And I have a feeling, just based on his public statements, it would have been Jon Rahm, and a former #1 player in the world as well. So it narrows it down to maybe him and McIlroy, I guess, possibly Colin Morikawa. But Rahm had been pretty down the middle about LIV. So I feel like maybe he was on the verge of at least considering jumping over. And if he did, then it was certainly going to be maybe the biggest blow yet to the PGA Tour. So I think both sides are motivated to come to the table. I think both sides can claim a victory, right? But for me, it still feels like more of a win for the PGA Tour because they're maintaining the brand. I'd be surprised if they call this tour something different, although I've been surprised already once this week. And I'm just not sure how sturdy the whole LIV framework is. I'm not sure. We're not guaranteed to see the team format go forward. We're not guaranteed to see the 54-hole thing go forward, or the music, the atmosphere, all that. I don't know how much that's going to be appropriated into this new world tour, which they're hoping to build. So it does feel like, in some sense, a win for the PGA Tour, but I do agree that it's a loss for Jay Monahan. Looks like a feckless, honestly cowardly leader in this case. And it's a lot of it's self-inflicted for me too. I don't know how you feel about it, Zach, but he didn't have to go out on that moral limb last year, bringing the 9/11 families. Oh my goodness, what he must be feeling right now, what they must be feeling right now is horrendous. They were totally really used. There's no other word to to put in place there. They were used, they were appropriated, and then discarded here. So that's it's just case in point why you don't make this about morals in the public sphere, as much as we may say that's what drives a lot of these decisions for a lot of people, and it may have for some of the people who decided to stay on the PGA Tour. But as we see today, this week, it is about business, and it's about who has the leverage, who has the power, and who has the motivation to, in this case, get together and try to make a mutually beneficial situation after this huge disruption caused by the Saudis.
Yeah, I mean, just wrapping it up here because I know we have other topics and we're definitely on a shot clock. It's the broadcasting on LIV was abysmal. I mean, you have the talent, but it was just, my gosh, it was a difficult watch just
Well,
trying
what
to
didn't you
follow.
like about it, Zach? Because I did like certain aspects. I like seeing more golf shots. I like the scoreboard being up there on the side.
The
Um,
broadcasters just didn't do it for me. Just I didn't feel like the camaraderie was there like it should have been. I mean, you're in year 2, you're a well-oiled machine. It just it's taking a page from their book. It just felt like don't blink. I mean, it was just forgettable. I mean, I like the putt tracers, I like the don't blink segments. I mean, that's stuff the PGA Tour can use, but I just felt like in the scheme of things, you have these broadcasters that you've come to know and you've adjusted, and Liv's had that year to adjust, and it just didn't do it for me. And now the possibility of maybe having a more rounded crew or having more organization along with those resources to develop a better, more watchable product, I think is something that could be more encouraging. But I mean, was it Rahm? I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to make much of it. The fact that he had a chance to take a slam dunk on some multiple LIV guys within the last couple of weeks here, and he really didn't pull the trigger. It leads me to believe that he was being political and he was kind of had a toe in both waters. Thank goodness we'll never know what would have happened for both sides. I mean, he could still probably play wherever he well pleases, but obviously, I mean, that would have been a huge blow as well. So, I mean, there's a lot to develop here, like we've said, and obviously just monitor the space over the next few weeks, maybe even couple months here as the season progresses.
And as the season progresses, we're on to the RBC Canadian Open, which is taking a huge backseat this week. It
Are
seems like
we?
it seems like a cool setup up there, especially with that rink. Me being a hockey guy, I'd love to go up there and check it out. But it's going to be a sideshow for sure. But in 2 weeks' time, we have the U.S. Open, or actually less than 2 weeks' time from now, maybe about a week's time. In fact, as we'll head on to the Los Angeles Country Club, a cool new venue. It looks like I've watched a couple of previews of it, some hole-by-hole recaps on YouTube, and it looks like a very interesting, diverse golf course. Not exactly one you'd think you'd see in Southern California. It's got some elements of some Northeast parkland in addition to what you typically see in the southern climes, but neither here nor there. I do want to discuss what you saw at the Memorial, because Zach, that was like a U.S. Open setup, or at the very least, like a PGA Championship setup in the most recent times, like the one we saw at Oak Hill, which was perhaps a U.S. Open light, or even just a U.S. Open regular test of golf, just based on the scores and what we saw throughout the weekend. There aren't any easy majors, I suppose, unless you go to St. Andrews. But neither here nor there. We do have LA Country Club coming up, and it seems like, yes, the obvious players are going to be the favorites. Jon Rahm already mentioned. Scotty Scheffler, if he can just get a few putts to drop, he could be running away with several tournaments, or could have run away with several tournaments this year. But Viktor Hovland appears to have turned a corner. And I loved your game story on Sunday, where you got some insight from Victor on his coach, Joseph Mayo, who's known as the TrackMan guru, but he's also a course management guy, believes in looking at the numbers and seeing what's what, where his players can make up some ground. And apparently he convinced Victor to play a lot more conservatively, especially on these more difficult golf courses. By that meaning not firing at flags when they are simply inaccessible or very hard to get to. And it really appeared to pay off both the PGA Championship, where it was just a buried line, a bunker lip, perhaps from taking Brooks Koepka all the way down to the 72nd hole. And then he prevails over Denny McCarthy in a playoff. Yeah, a putt dropped here or there, and McCarthy could have won, but Hovland's putting himself in the mix at the top of these leaderboards in these difficult tournaments. I mean, you think difficulty, you think U.S. Open. So where do you gauge Viktor Hovland? Is he ready to take that final step? For me, it sure seems like he is.
Well, I mean, the Memorial, I think, is going to have thicker rough than what you're going to see at LACC. It seems like the players that are there have the understanding that, yes, there's going to be less rough at LACC, but there's going to be more flyers that are taken. So it's judging the lies, and especially the second shot, which Muirfield Village Golf Club is a second shot course. So, I mean, the tournament was exactly what you wanted, minus the purple greens. It was that there were 31 golfers before Morikawa withdrew to bring it to 30 within 4 shots. So they were looking for somebody to make a big move, and no one really made that move other than Scheffler. But like you said, just so many burnt edges. And it was interesting. We were waiting while Scotty Scheffler was doing the live shot with CBS. So we had Teddy Scott in there, and I mean, guy sat down right away. I mean, it was 4 straight weeks for Scotty Scheffler, and I think he felt it in every single way. He's committed to the tee to green so much, which makes him a really good contender for next week. But again, putts have to drop, and that's what it boils down to. Jon Rahm would have been in contention. He was +5 or 6 just in the first hole's aggregate, and that includes 2 first-day birdies. So it just goes to show you, if he had played those first 4 holes with any semblance close to par, I mean, it could have been his second Memorial tournament, and the course kind of owes him one after that whole pandemic situation. So it would have been nice to have seen that even out. But Patrick Cantlay, another one, Hideki Matsuyama, these are guys on the first page of the leaderboard after play on Friday. And you think one of those 2 guys is probably going to be the guy that lifts it, because they just know the course better than anybody else. And they both petered out. I mean, just the rough was just so penal. Greens were not holding, and their short games just were not as strong as needed to be. They just flinched one too many times. Even Viktor Hovland on the 8th hole, he is a chip, and he flubs the chip and keeps it in the heavy rough, just couldn't get it out. And I think he was so worried about overplaying it that he underplayed it. But he rebounded as he made the turn, and that just was a huge world of difference. I had the opportunity last year of talking to Viktor Hovland one-on-one, and it was a guy that I was struck by how much he had a good head on his shoulders. He was really accessible, really easy to talk to, and so was Morikawa this week. But it's just so apparent how much more I'm not saying he was immature a year ago, but because he wasn't, but on the course, he's just so much more mature. And I think it goes back to what you said. You have the coach that kind of lets you see the whole game and let the course kind of unfold in front of you instead of you dictating the course. And there's just times where you don't need to be needlessly aggressive. And I think Victor was trying to press. I mean, he's a part of this much heralded rookie class that he was in with Matt Wolff, with Morikawa, with Justin Suh, whose game has started to pick up. And there's some pressure that comes with that. On the course, media attention, off the course with endorsements, just your own time being compromised. So really, I think he's finally started to find a balance, and that's why you're seeing him contend. It seems like he's happy to be out there. It wasn't necessarily a chore before, but obviously your mind starts to race when you're not able to get the results. I mean, this was his first landslide United States win. I mean, the tournament, the 4 previous events he had won were kind of this is not a big field event. So he's won events, and won a year, but at what cost? Really, it wasn't against the big field. So now no one can say he can't win against a big field, which dovetails in next week perfectly. He very well could contend, but he also could very well be tired. I mean, it's been an exhausting stretch for everybody, not to mention there's so many guys that just came through sectional qualifying on Monday, and in one site's case, Tuesday's circumstance. So it's been a lot of golf for everybody. I think the one that just holds his nerve the best at week's end next week is, it sounds so simple and cliche, but I think the one whose headspace is the most free and most engaged is the one that's going to find a way to win. I think it just boils down to that. Could it be the 4 you discussed? Of course, those are the odds on favorites, but I mean, I think you're going to see a guy that's able to maybe take it a little bit further off the tee, will have a little bit more success. It's not like a tournament where a Michael Block could necessarily contend. It's not, let's try to just get it in the fairways or the premium hit it. There's a lot more attached to it. So it's where accuracy and missing in the right spots is really into play. So that's where course knowledge goes into play. And really, I don't think McIlroy's going to have a good week next week. He's not even going to see the course until he comes in Monday, Tuesday, and he's going to be exhausted. He just played Memorial and he played his heart out and ran out of steam. And just, I think being in the final group as opposed to maybe being a few groups back might have mentally played with him a little bit, where maybe he thought his game was further along than it was, though he's still optimistic. So I would fade Rory next week personally. I just think there's a lot of baggage, and I think there's probably a little bit of him that's really heartbroken given the news that's come out this week. So really, there's a lot to consider there. So it's tuning out the noise, it's playing your game, and whoever does that best next week is going to win. I really don't think I can pick this for next week just because there's just so many variables, maybe more so than ever before. But it's also kind of a new course. You have a really long par 3, and you have what, an 80-yard par 3 at one point. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of variety there. So that, for how that variety is handled on the course, it'll be interesting. I think it will end up being a good setup. A lot of these guys are speaking favorably of it. A lot of the Californian PGA Tour players are offering some perspective, and seems like they know the course and have a knowledge. Maybe this is Max Homa's time. I mean, he took the Memorial off, so he might be the most rested, and he loves to play in California, so maybe this is his major, but I don't know. We'll see.
I was just going to say, I issue a challenge formally to Max Homa. He has not gotten it done in the majors. If you look at, there's a website called Data Golf that measures your performance in regular events compared to your performance in majors. I think Homa, out of the prominent players of today, in the top 50 in the OWGR, for what that's worth, he is the most underperforming male pro in the majors over the course of his career, which dates back now several years as far as being on the PGA Tour. So he was right there in the Genesis, and like you said, he has performed pretty well in California over the course of his career. He's got 2 wins at the Fortinet up in Northern California. So it just makes too much sense to pick him, but he's just done so badly in majors, and it doesn't make any sense because he's such a good ball striker when he's playing well. But speaking of ball striking, that's what Hovland's always had, and now it seems like he's figured out the chip game. He is not looking yippy around the greens anymore, and I think courses actually with deeper rough, like the Memorial, like we'll see plenty of deep greenside rough here at LACC. We saw it at Oak Hill and Rochester for the PGA Championship. I think it benefits someone like Victor because you don't have to be quite as precise chipping off of tight lies and pitching off of tight lies all day. I know when I'm feeling kind of shaky about my chipping game, I prefer the deeper lies because you have a little bit more of a cushion and a little more margin around the green. And so I think that actually favors a guy like Victor, who hasn't had around the green be a strength at least earlier in his career, but it is coming around. That's why we're seeing him increasingly at the top of leaderboards and challenging for titles, and now finally winning stateside, as Zach had the thorough coverage there, not just about Hovland, but about Colin Morikawa trying to find his game. There's another California guy, right? And someone who's won a couple of majors too. So keep him in mind. He's won a major in California, even at Harding Park in the 2020 PGA Championship. But all that coverage is there at PittsburghGolfNow.com. Zach, we have about a few minutes left before we have to go and before time runs out on us here. So we do get to the fourth shot on the PGN par 4, and we do get to talking about the LPGA. Rose Zhang winning at Liberty National in Jersey City, New Jersey last week. And what's a unique event, first-year event, the Mizuho America's Cup, which involved American Junior Golf Association, AJGA players, in addition to the pros. So maybe kind of a convoluted setup there, but Rose Zhang fought through some slow play. That last round took about 6 hours, I think, on Sunday, and then she needed a playoff to defeat
I'm
Jennifer
looking at my
Kupcho.
watch.
Yeah, she won on the second playoff hole with darkness descending, with the Statue of Liberty in the background there on 18. So a cool look, but they almost had to go to a Monday. But I digress. Rose Zhang, I mentioned at the top, she's won the NCAA individual championship twice, helped lead Stanford to the team title as well. It's gotten a little bit hairy here down the stretch in a couple of her wins, Zach. The Augusta National Women's Amateur, it was not the best back nine for her, maybe due to her dad being on the bag. So maybe there was extenuating circumstances at that one, but she's made it close, but she has delivered the goods here. I don't want to call the ANWA a pro event, but it felt like a pro event. It was a nationally televised event, her biggest audience to date for sure, to watch her play golf. She doesn't bring a lot of power either. She's not like a Nelly Korda that makes you gape in awe at her swing and what she's able to do physically. She's just a really good ball striker, all around a good player. And she had a better record than Tiger Woods, more wins than Tiger Woods at Stanford. So that's a feather in her cap forever. So what's your excitement about what she can do on the LPGA Tour? Do you think she's a crossover type star, or is she more of a golf nerd, a golf aficionado star, where you really have to appreciate the game and play the game to understand how good she is?
I think we need to relax. It's been one tour event. I think it's as simple as that. I don't need to keep anything overly abundant on her. I think that she has a really good head on her shoulders, a good history of the game. For a golf fan, absolutely pay the extra bucks to read The Athletic. Brendan Quinn's long form feature on her is amazing. And one of my favorite nuggets in there was she talked about just how she feels that there's a lot of other players that maybe have more talent than her, but she doesn't make the mistakes. And that's what kind of pushes her through. The fact that this young, that she's so self-aware, regardless of how big everything is around her, all of the noise, the circle, who to trust, who not to trust. She's very self-aware, which at such a young age is very, very hard to say. She was raised properly, and yeah, she had the mix up with the club with her dad, where her dad kind of convinced her and she wasn't committed. But it was a very similar circumstance this past weekend. Please, next year, if you have this event, put the young kids on the clock. It's come on. But the fact that Peacock was willing to, for women's golf, which is, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm saying this is a good thing. The fact that they were self-aware enough to move up so you could see a couple more holes from Rose Zhang and see this historic finish. It really shows that they believe, that they understand that she's marketable and that she has it, whatever you view it as. So I think that what she was able to do was remarkable in her first event. I just hope she doesn't put too much pressure on herself, and she can just find ways to stay true to herself and execute her shots and execute in between her ears and try to find ways to just have fun. I mean, obviously people are already talking Solheim Cup, but again, let's relax and just enjoy this. It's one tour event. She has such a great background. She has the pedigree. She could do it. I think she will do it, but I hope that she stays within herself and has fun along the way. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I have enjoyed seeing how she seems just totally unimpressed by the whole situation. And I don't think she's going to let the hype get the better of her. I'm hoping that we see a lot of her down the stretch here in the LPGA season. But we've got a couple of majors left, too, for her to try to make a run at. And after an extremely decorated amateur career, It couldn't gone any better, obviously, in Pro Start number 1, and like we said, some extenuating circumstances, some weirdness with the slow play, threesomes on the final day with the amateur involved. In her group, it was Anna Davis who won the ANWA last year, so it wasn't like it was some slug out there with her, but still, it did tend to bog down the play in general, I think. And when you're the last group, you feel all that traffic, don't you? It all piles up for you. When you're in the back. So congrats to Rose, and actually the LPGA has come up in my neck of the woods in a couple of weeks for the Meyer Classic here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'll have to see if I can get out there for the second straight year and see some of the golf in person. But another marquee name for the LPGA that certainly cannot hurt in selling the women's game. And who knows? Maybe the LPGA will be folded into this new Men's World Golf League. LPGA is already sponsored by Aramco, which is the oil company of Saudi Arabia. Or some of the women's events are, not the LPGA, but there is an Aramco World Series that's already part of women's golf. So I guess the Saudi cash talks, Zach, and maybe we'll be sponsored at some point by the PIF. No, wouldn't accept it.
GPS signal lost.
We've probably gone a little too far afield. Hey, I'm just saying, we take every phone call, unlike Jay Monahan a couple of years. Thank you for watching the PGN Par 4. Oh my goodness, so much to talk about. Like I said, we took about a month and a half off, but even if we took 2 days off, we would have had plenty of content here. And without exaggeration, one of the more surprising and staggering sports stories of my lifetime. Just the fact someone texted me and said, "LIV and the PGA are merging." I'm like, what are you talking about? What AI algorithm or what deep fake account put this out there? But it was real. It actually happened as far as we can tell. And still so much to go. We are still very early on in the timeline. All right, for Zac Weiss, who covered the Memorial beautifully for us and thoroughly. Also a shout out to his photographer, Chris Pohl, and his wonderful images from the grounds at Muirfield Village. My name is Matt Gajtka. This has been the PGN Par 4. Talk to you next time and enjoy the U.S. Open. And we'll see you soon, I promise.